Let me start by telling you something that will hit hard. Sometimes the person who promises you forever is the same person who will chip away at your soul piece by piece. And when that person is a narcissistic husband, the word love becomes a weapon, not a refuge. He begins by wrapping himself in charm. He tells you you are special, adored, the center of his world. He lavishes attention, compliments, and gifts, making you feel like you found the love you've always dreamed of. But behind the smiles and grand gestures lies a dangerous pattern, a pattern designed to control, manipulate, and dominate. The first disturbing way a narcissistic husbands his wife is through subtle control disguised as care. He decides what is best for her, often framing it as protection, guidance, or concern. He tells her which friends she should keep, which activities she should enjoy, and even how she should think and feel. It starts as tiny nudges, almost invisible. But over time, those nudges become chains. They isolate her from her support system, they erode her confidence, and they condition her to doubt her instincts. And here's the hardest truth. He doesn't see her as a partner. He sees her as property. Her thoughts, her desires, her autonomy are secondary to his ego. And in that dynamic, love becomes something terrifying, not sacred. The second disturbing way a narcissistic husband treats his wife is through constant criticism disguised as honesty. At first, it may feel like constructive feedback, like he's helping her grow, but soon the comments aren't about guidance. They're about control. He critiques her appearance, her choices, her intelligence, even the way she expresses love. Every word chips away at her self-esteem. The cruelty of this tactic is subtle. He wraps it in concern. I'm just trying to help you, or I only want what's best for you. And she begins to question herself. Was she really too sensitive, too lazy, too emotional? He makes her doubt her own instincts, her own worth, her own reality. Over time, this relentless criticism becomes a pattern, conditioning her to second guess every thought and every action. She begins to shrink, to hide her true self, to censor her dreams and desires, all to avoid the sting of his disapproval. But let's be clear, this is not love. Love uplifts. Love celebrates. Love encourages. A husband who truly loves his wife does not make her feel small, unworthy, or inadequate. And here's the devastating truth. The narcissistic husband uses critique not to help, but to dominate. Every comment is a thread in the web of control, tightening around her until she can barely breathe in the space that should have been her sanctuary. The third disturbing way a narcissistic husband treats his wife is through emotional manipulation and gaslighting. He doesn't just criticize, he rewrites reality. He denies things he said, dismisses things she remembers, and makes her question her own mind. She says, "You promised this," and he responds, "I never said that. You're imagining things." She expresses hurt, and he calls her dramatic or overreacting. Slowly, she begins to doubt herself, wondering if she's losing touch with reality. Gaslighting is powerful because it attacks the very foundation of trust in her own perception. Every disagreement becomes a battlefield where her memories and feelings are invalidated. She starts walking on eggshells, fearful that speaking her truth will provoke anger or punishment. This isn't emotional growth, it's emotional captivity. Her confidence erodes, her voice grows quieter, and her spirit retreats. He doesn't nurture her, he fractures her. He doesn't love her, he controls her. The cruel irony is that outsiders may see him as caring, supportive, even charming, but behind closed doors, she is trapped in a storm where her own mind becomes her enemy. Here's the brutal truth. A narcissistic husband does not protect his wife's heart, he exploits it. And in this exploitation, she begins to forget the sound of her own voice and the courage of her own convictions. The fourth disturbing way a narcissistic husband treats his wife is by isolating her from her support system. At first, it may appear subtle, your friends don't understand us, or I just want to spend more time together. But gradually, he limits her interactions, keeping her away from friends, family, and anyone who might remind her worth outside of him. Isolation is one of his most powerful tools. When she is alone, she becomes dependent on him for validation, for decision-making, for emotional support. Her world shrinks until he is the center, the measure, the only voice she hears consistently. And in this controlled space, he can manipulate, punish, and gaslight with impunity. The tragedy is that she begins to internalize it. She questions whether she can navigate life without him, whether her feelings are valid, whether her instincts can be trusted. She is trained to see herself through his eyes, a lens that magnifies flaws and erases strengths. This is not love. Love expands, it nurtures, it connects. True love encourages bonds and community, not isolation and fear. The disturbing truth is clear. A narcissistic husband doesn't just manipulate his wife, he controls the very ecosystem of her life. And in that control, her independence, her confidence, and even her sense of self are slowly suffocated. The fifth disturbing way a narcissistic husband treats his wife is by turning her achievements into threats. When she succeeds, he feels threatened rather than proud. When she shines, he doesn't celebrate. He criticizes, diminishes, or downplays her accomplishments. He cannot allow her light to outshine his fragile ego, so he dims it with sly remarks, sarcasm, or passive-aggressive comments. What should be moments of joy and pride turn into confusion and pain. She begins to question herself, wondering if her accomplishments are really worthy or if she has to hide her brilliance just to keep him comfortable. Over time, she learns to shrink, to play small, to silence the very aspects of herself that make her unique and powerful. This is not love. Love celebrates growth. Love amplifies potential. Love uplifts. It does not diminish. Real love says, shine brightly and I'll stand beside you, applauding every victory. But in the world of a narcissistic husband, her independence and success are threats to control. He wants a partner who stays small, compliant, and dependent. Here's the harsh reality. He doesn't want a wife who thrives. He wants a wife who survives in the shadow of his ego. And in that shadow, her joy, her confidence, and her freedom begin to fade. The sixth disturbing way a narcissistic husband treats his wife is by weaponizing her emotions against her. When she cries, he calls her dramatic. When she is frustrated, he calls her irrational. When she expresses fear, he calls her unstable. Instead of offering comfort, he uses her vulnerability as a weapon, turning her feelings into ammunition for manipulation or punishment. This is one of the cruelest dynamics because love should feel like safety. Love should be a place where tears are held, anger is understood, and fears are honored. But in his world, emotions are weaknesses to exploit, not signals to respond to with empathy. Over time, she learns to hide her feelings, to bury her pain, to silence her voice, not because her emotions aren't valid, they are, but because showing them triggers punishment, disdain, or withdrawal. Her emotional expression, which should be a bridge to connection, becomes a minefield. Real love nurtures the heart. It offers space to feel. It responds with care, not criticism. A narcissistic husband turns care into control and affection into a weapon. The heartbreaking truth is this: he does not nurture her heart, he exploits it. And in exploiting it, he forces her into a constant state of self-protection, walking through life with parts of herself permanently silenced. The seventh disturbing way a narcissistic husbands his wife is by using guilt and obligation as tools of control. He reminds her constantly of what he has done for her, how much he has sacrificed, and all the ways she owes him. Every act of independence, every boundary she sets, is framed as ingratitude or betrayal. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me, becomes a recurring refrain. This manipulative tactic is powerful because it warps love into a transaction. Affection, attention, and care are no longer gifts. They are debts that must be repaid through obedience. Compliance and self-erasure, she begins to measure her worth not by her values or her happiness, but by how much she satisfies him. Over time, guilt becomes her constant companion. She apologizes for thinking, for speaking, for living. Her independence and choices are shadowed by fear of emotional punishment. And slowly, she starts to lose sight of her own desires, dreams, and needs. This is not love. Love inspires freedom, joy, and mutual respect. Love does not demand repayment for simply existing. The harsh truth is this: a narcissistic husband uses guilt to bend her will, erode her confidence, and trap her spirit. And in this distortion, she begins to live not in partnership, but in captivity of the heart and mind. The eighth disturbing way a narcissistic husband treats his wife is by manipulating intimacy to maintain control. Love, closeness, and vulnerability are supposed to be